And we forget about it. Why? Because we print the money.
David, could you start by just telling us a bit, what are the disadvantages of having that kind of global reserve currency as your country's currency? I'm thinking about the phrase sterling crisis, which we used to hear all the time from the 1960s through perhaps even to the early 1990s, not so much anymore. Having a reserve currency means that there are things you have to do which are not always great for the domestic economy.
Yeah, it's interesting you asked me that question. On the train yesterday from Hereford from Newport to here, there was a woman with 5 children, and they were all full of E numbers and sugar, and they were going mental. And she was trying her best to corral the sheep, so to speak, and also look like a nice, mother, not roaring and shouting and clattering the head off them. And it's funny you talk about the exorbitant privilege. I think having a reserve currency is a bit like that. You are the dominant currency, which you're surrounded by delinquent children currencies, right? Okay? And the delinquent children currencies just go off in their sweet Todd and they're pressing the button, trying to slow the train down, telling alphas to fuck off, doing the usual thing. Things you don't want your children to do in public, but they do, and they embarrass you. So just keep that image in your head. So I remember many years ago, I worked in the Irish Central Bank, where we were a satellite currency of the Deutschmark. And which was always kind of strange because the Irish, for many years, we kind of pretended that our currency was actually the Deutschmark, which is a bit like Irish people pretending to be German. It doesn't really work, okay? And so I used to go to the meetings just carrying the bag for the central bank governor. I was only a young fella. And you could see the exasperation on the part of the Germans as they were trying to corral ourselves, the Italians, the feckin' Greeks, the Spaniards, right? All into this. You've asked me what it looks like. This is what it looks like. And, and during the crisis, you talk about sterling crisis, but I've lived in a country that has had 4 currencies in my lifetime. So we know all about various currencies, banking crisis. We're really good at that sort of stuff. And what really intrigued me was you'd see the Germans, and when in 2008, when the world collapsed, and 2010, when the European Union had a massive bond crisis, I remember sitting there and talking to a German central banker, now at the ECB. I remember he looked at me and he said, yeah, we have a huge crisis. Yeah, it's terrible. It's all you Catholics. I said, what?
He wasn't Bavarian.
He said, no, he wasn't. He was Northern. He says, it's you, the Irish, the Italians, the Portuguese, the Spanish. And I said, what about the Greeks? He said, proto-Catholics, right? So, and by this I mean is that economics is not about straight lines. Economics is a reflection of culture. Economics is a reflection of the deep prejudices and biases and choices that are taken by countries around the world. And when you aggregate those up, it comes to economic policy, which is why the exchange rate, in a way, legitimizes idiosyncratic behavior. This is what I've always felt. And when we tried as Europeans to have the euro, which has been amazingly successful, given what we were trying to put together, and the reason it's been amazingly successful is there has been a coup d'etat at the ECB, an Italian coup d'etat, okay?
Mr. Draghi.
Exactly. So when we first joined, it was going to be a Germanic thing, and it was going to be straight lines and rules and regelmäßig and all that sort of stuff. And then the Italians said, we can't deal with that. The system will break if we're not flexible. So what I think has happened, there has been a Southern European takeover of the ECB. That has meant the ECB has abandoned all their previous German rhetoric. We won't buy bonds.
To be fair, Mr. Mario Draghi, we should say, I think people know he is the governor of the European Central Bank. He's a pretty Northern European kind of Southern European, though. I mean, he's not exactly profligate.
He bought the bonds of Greece. He bought the bonds of Italy. He bought the bonds of Germany. He is profit. He just realized, the great thing about central banking, right, is you make the stuff up, okay? And the central bank, Central bank sits over a big skip, and into that skip you fuck all the really bad debt.
When you were working in the Irish Central Bank, was this one of your briefing notes, David?
Yes, this is the way we speak, right? Okay, how do you explain to the people what's going on? So the central bank is, if there's a debt crisis and a currency crisis and all the debt goes, we bought it at $1 and now it's only worth 20 cents, right? You have 2 things to do. Either you go bust or you kick for touch, right? And how do you kick for touch? In the economic terms, you create a big skip into which you throw all the bad stuff. It's basically a cash for trash scheme, right? Okay? The central bank takes the trash. We give the cash to the banking system. They therefore are not bust, right? They can go on as if nothing happened. And we forget about it. Why? Because we print the money. So this is the key thing to understand, is that the exorbitant privilege is also an avenue out of delinquency. And an avenue out of delinquency, a redemptive avenue out of delinquency, is how democracies work. That's how we work, okay? We don't take an absolute position when we make mistakes. So my point to you is, there are costs, and I remember experiencing the poor Germans seeing that, but there are massive, massive benefits too.
If your German banker was saying that the Greeks were essentially proto-Catholics, if they had in fact been using regulation to control the drachma, which would have been their currency, as Greeks, presumably that would have been financial orthodoxy, not Catholicism. Let's move on rapidly.
You have to give it to him. Come on, give it to him.
It should also be said that half of Germany is Catholic, but maybe...
No, but the northern half.
They don't let Bavarians run the banks.
So,
Just the car company.
Yeah.
Janne,
anyway,
go ahead.
I want to get back to the hardcore question of the disadvantages of being the reserve currency. I mean, it's also evident that you can run a much higher trade deficit because you're without your currency deflating and or depreciating, sorry. And that's part of, again, why J.D. Vance and certain people say we shouldn't be even that the reserve currency, because they want that depreciation. Because, probably all know that the U.S. runs an enormous trade deficit. And the U.S. has a debt of 125% of the GDP. That's of the country's entire production in a year. They owe 125%. So it'll take them quite a few years to pay it off if they should want to do that without starving everyone. So anyway, that is where the real cost lies, that it puts a pressure on the rest of your economy, because other countries with just normal currency that they are responsible only to themselves about, that currency will go up and down depending on your level of import and export and your productivity. And you can't do that as a reserve currency. And another thing I think it's really important to remember is what is money or a US dollar? I should have brought a US dollar, because you look at this thing, it's a piece of paper with some print on. The value of money is a total illusion. It's because we decide it has a value. This little piece of paper with some green print, we give it a value, because we all expect it that if we can use it to pay in a store or we give it to someone else, that other person will also give it that imaginary value. So it'll add up to say, okay, we all say that piece of paper with this particular print has the value that we give it. Because it's not like, I think it was back until the 30s, that currencies were linked to gold. We don't have a gold standard anymore. So it's really an absolute illusion, that value we give to a currency. And it's only upheld as long as that illusion holds. And that illusion only holds as long as we believe a country has a stable economy. And talking about future, that stable future. And I think probably all of us look a bit, with shock at the US for the moment, because we expected the US to be very stable. And suddenly we have not a clue where the US will be in a month. Every second day the policy changes. Now we just heard what Trump will put 50% tariff on Europe. And it's like, you look at this thing, and I think that's the main thing about economy is stability. Is a clue. Any company that tries to trade with another country needs to know what the price to set. Can they only know depending on what is the exchange rate with that other country? The people who shall buy and put an order in for something they might get in 2 months, they need to know what is the exchange rate in this period of time, what are the tariffs we have to pay. And all that Trump is just crushing. And we don't know where the end of this game is. So actually, I think it was Lagarde, who is now the chief of the ECB, who said this is also a chance for Europe to step up now. And like I think they're trying to do militarily, because suddenly we see NATO can't rely on the US anymore. Economically, we also have to do it. And coming from the EU, we're happy to see that the UK and the Starmer is now getting closer to the EU again, realizing we have to stand together as Europe, however close it can be, but somehow in a very good close cooperation, because that stability is so essential for all of us. Then we can discuss political priorities and income inequality and all that, but without the stability, we can't do anything else.
So you brought up, Janne, both the US and Europe, and I want to bring both of those into the following discussion. The House of Representatives passing the big, beautiful bill, the Tax and Economics Bill, which, amongst other things, seems to be about to load a large amount of new debt onto the United States, and it may well get passed through the Senate in some form. What will be the effect of that on the dollar's value as a reserve currency, David?
To continue watching this video, click the link in the top left or in the description below.
With a free trial, you can enjoy the full talk and thousands more.
Thank you for being part of the conversation.